This afternoon, we are pleased to have Lauren Whearty joining us. Lauren Whearty is an artist, educator, and curator living and working in Philadelphia, PA. She received her MFA from The Ohio State University in Columbus, Ohio, and her BFA from Tyler School of Art, Temple University in Philadelphia, PA. And she has been a co-director at Ortega y Gasset Projects, an artist-run curatorial collective and non-profit in Brooklyn, New York since 2017. Lauren has attended residencies such as Yale's Summer School of Art through the Ellen Patel Stokol Fellowship, the Vermont Studio Center, Soaring Gardens Artists Retreat through the Ora Lerma Trust, and the Golden Foundation Artist Residency. She has recently received grants from the Elizabeth Grassfields Foundation and Joseph Roberts Foundation. Some places where her work has been exhibited include the Delaware Contemporary, the State Museum of PA, the Woodmere Museum, Gross McLeaf Gallery, Vox Populi, Bridget Mayer Gallery, Center for Emerging Visual Artists, Satellite Contemporary, Monaco, the Painting Center, Ortega y Gasset Projects, 11 Noel, Underdonk, Sam and Adele Golden Gallery, and Dina Evans Projects. Lauren currently teaches at the University of the Arts and Tyler School of Art and Architecture in Philadelphia. So everyone, please join me in giving a warm welcome to Lauren.
Hi, thank you so much for having me. Thank you for inviting me. I'm going to jump in with a little bit of a thesis statement and then go from there. I focus on subjects that are often overlooked in order to evoke a sense of interiority from their arrangement, use, and context. These setups conjure narratives of my own personal and intimate experiences through the organization of specific objects of culture and everyday use that are composed to create new relationships. The inherent familiarity of these often sentimental objects and settings invites viewers to make connections between that which is deeply personal as well as shared. So I paint still lives from observation specifically because I find the studio to be a place of freedom. So it's a place that is my time, my space, and I can do whatever I want. It maybe sort of has a room of one's own feeling to it in that way. I think it's important in the studio or just in space to have place for pleasure, for joy, and to work out all of the complicated stuff about life. I also think that reality is stranger than fiction, so working from things that are directly in front of me and maybe seeing how they make meaning over time is interesting to me. And I think I wrote too many notes on my slides. I often speak through a language of material culture, so you'll see a lot of different kinds of objects in my still lives that are definitely from our time. I really love that phrase from Alice Neal that she loves painting the zeitgeist, that the painting sits in time, it sits in our time and is a result of that. I always think that things that look classical are a bit boring or maybe just relying on the past a bit too much, and I think it's important for things to be of our time. Let's see if I can do the... Nope. All right. Let's see. Next slide. This is a still life painting. In terms of objects and things like that, I think it's silly to include something as recognizable as the Comcast TV remote. I'm interested in that exact recognizability of the objects and also that scene of maybe sitting on the couch with that glow of the TV, that unnatural light, and just trying to put things in paintings that I've not seen in painting before. In terms of art history, I'm always thinking about what is my place in art history. I get to have a conversation, with all of the dead artists, all of the alive artists that I want. And here I have two, they happen to be Dutch paintings, painted by men, of course, and they are essentially still lives with figures in them. The thing that I find interesting about this pairing that I see repeatedly in art history is that on the left, the artist in his studio as a man is almost there. He's got this idea, he's got something that's, some breakthrough that's about to happen. And that is evidenced through the mess of sculptures, musical instruments, the globe. So he is the master of all of these subjects, this craft, and so on. And then so often when we see other kinds of still lives or women in rooms, there's an order to it, there's a cleanliness, there's a calmness, and that often speaks to historically what people's jobs are, what gendered bodies do every day, or what they're expected to do. And I'm always trying to figure out what to do about that. That, neither of these are exactly are me. So where am I in this? I think the painting upstairs by Joan Brown is a really good example of this. So we've got the totally messy studio floor, and yet she's in a perfectly clean white dress, long white gloves, and she's painting a still life. I think there's a great sense of humor to this one, and it's a subject that is exciting for me. Here's a painting of my studio table. So this is during the pandemic. My studio became my office, stayed my studio, became a place to create demos, to have my classroom. So I've got the Zoom grid on my computer, playing with photos of my work, and just everything is there all at once, including my coffee. And relating back to those art historic paintings, we're all juggling a lot of things every day, and it's not particularly neat. And so I thought the pandemic really shoved all of that together in a visual way, since we all had to take all of our work home and combine the personal and public and professional in ways that we had not expected before. The other thing about this is just thinking about how when you sit on Zoom, you have that clean background behind you, but nobody can see the mess of the things that are actually going on around the screen. Here's another one where at the time I was already ready to take the still life outside of the studio. So many of my still lifes happened in my own space where I work. So I was just ready to play with how that narrative could shift, or could tell more kinds of narratives by putting the stuff somewhere else. So this is a similar subject, but at home with my empty planner and lunch and a lint roller and some souvenirs and so on. Zoom COVID Thanksgiving. Maybe one of my favorite Thanksgivings, because I got to eat everything I wanted. And then you can see everybody in that corner up there. Oh, excuse me. This is not a chronological talk, so this is jumping back to what I was working in undergrad, just to think about how I've been dealing with the same things for a long time, and probably didn't recognize it then. This is an aisle of greeting cards. So they're colorful, they're sentimental, but they're also generic. They're someone else's words for birthdays, holidays, and so on, and they're categorized in all these generic, like age, gender, and things you like kind of categories. And yet they can still be really emotional, they can carry weight. People save them, some people throw them out. So I think they have an interesting duality about them, about maybe even just standing in the aisle trying to choose the right card, and what is that, or is that challenging, or is that something that's sort of silly? This is a painting that I made after coming back from Temple Rome's study abroad program, which was life-changing. I was interested in all of these spaces that were like supermarkets, big box stores, things that I saw in the suburbs growing up that I didn't see in art. And then I went to Rome, and everything was tiny, there were little markets, and it was just a completely different worldview. So Masaccio's Holy Trinity is on the right, that's in Siena, and it's this perfect one-point perspective construction. And I just wanted to steal that, because I thought one-point perspective was a really exciting way to invent space, not just to replicate something that already existed, but to construct your own. So I took a push pin, tied a string to it, and invented my own Holy Trinity supermarket situation, and allowed the bags to stand in for people a little bit. And I thought that the white chalk corresponded to the fluorescent lighting really nicely. And so being in Rome, there was just so much art history to sift through, and how do you do that as somebody who lives hundreds of years later? So it's an exciting way to try and take stuff from those time periods and talk about them. This is another one from undergrad. It is 4 by 8 feet. The other one was about 9 or 10 feet tall. This is on 2 door panels. So the door panels are skinny, they're 2 feet wide, and I stretched canvas over them and painted this aisle of milks. I just thought it was ridiculous that there were so many choices, and they became pattern-like and anonymous in some way, and yet you can still recognize which one is the whole milk. This and the greeting cards is probably the first time that I was playing with advertising kind of color. I really liked that it cut through anything like atmospheric perspective, and that was the place where I saw that kind of color in the world. And I think that just started my lifelong love of color. When I was in grad school, I'd also had a studio visit with a faculty member named Ed Valentine, and he, in grad school, I think I was a bit confused about what I was up to in art, trying to figure it all out. And he was like, "What do you want to paint?" And I was like, "Everything." And he's like, "What? Are you sure about that?" It's like, yeah, I want to paint everything. And so I think the further I get from that conversation, the more true that might be. Even though something like still life can seem really limiting, what it actually does is give you possibilities to dive deeper into your own ideas, your own concepts, your own feelings. And so I think in limiting myself in some ways, I get to have freedom in others. So that leads me to my favorite video game, which is Katamari Damacy. The kanji name of that is translates to clump and spirit generally. So he's a little prince whose dad accidentally destroyed the cosmos, and he has to rebuild it all by rolling this ball around Earth and picking up from candy to paper clips to shoes to people to the whole world. And I think it's a really funny game. It's ridiculous, but it also speaks to this idea of world building and just everything all at once. And I find it really amusing and include this guy in my paintings pretty often. This is a little screenshot of the rolled up world. And this is a painting of a lint roller that I think looks similar in some ways. So during grad school, I think the summer between the 2 years that I was there, I went to New York for a day and I saw a show of Monet's water lilies at Gagosian. So they were all the later water lilies paintings. And we've all seen them before, one at a time, or gone to France to see the museum of them all. But this show really struck me because of my phenomenal experience with the paintings. So I walked in the room, I saw an image, and I walked up to the painting, and the image disappeared. And then I packed up, and it was there again. And so, I've always been interested in these ideas of phenomenology, thinking about the essay of Cézanne's doubt, and so on. And here I just got to have that in a really rich experience where it was just broken down into paint itself. It was nothing but marks, but at the same time the marks came together and formed an image at different times. So what an amazing thing a still image could do. It could be fluid, it could move with my movements and change with my perception and thought, and that was just so exciting. The other thing that those paintings do is depict multiple images at one time. So not only are we depicting the water, what we see through the water, but what is above the water, and what is sitting on the water's surface. So it just an interesting way to have it all in one landscape, in one image, but looking down. So those things, I'm still obsessed with those paintings. They're really exciting to me. My work in grad school became pretty much like marks on the canvas that were related to landscape, but I was losing a lot of imagery. And so once school was over, I was a little bit bored. I wanted to repopulate my canvases with stuff, with images, with people, and therefore I had to learn how to draw again because, you know, the gestural work that I was doing didn't, you know, keep that muscle memory the same way. So I had to figure out, how do I draw again? How do I make paintings again that have representational stuff in them? So I started with these what if scenarios. You know, when you're out of school, you have 3 or 4 jobs, you don't have money for a model, so you've got yourself and you've got your imagination. So that is where I started. I imagined things like, what if somebody went to get a sandwich in the middle of the night and the refrigerator lit up their hands? Like very silly kind of things that help me get to images and compositions that, you know, I'm always playing with the rectangle of the canvas, and they allowed me to do that. So in learning to draw again, or figure out what the best drawing practice is for me, I started working with a lot of colored pencil. I love colored pencil because it's super direct. It's the color that you're going to use, it is the mark you're going to make, it connects to painting really well. And so developing these images from memory and hypotheticals is really exciting, and this allowed me to train for my paintings. So some of the paintings from that series they're mostly about fish in ponds and imagining maybe a third person view. So what if I am seeing myself seeing under the water, or a view that I couldn't possibly see from my own perspective. So they were invented and came from a collage of sources, and I really focused a lot on the movement of water and things like that because of my interest in Monet, but also because water is such a good metaphor for paint. They share so many things. It's liquidy, it's moving, it can change its viscosity or character at different times with different conditions. So I think it's always a good subject for painting. And then from there I would just make, you know, very basic shifts to keep that imagination going. What if there were 2 fish? What if it was night? What if? So that just led me down an interesting path. As an art history nerd, I'm also always thinking about, you know, where I am in art history, how it relates to me. So this is a little painting of like, what if Leda got the swan instead of the other way around? So, you know, just messing with the expectations of what could happen, or how I could take those narratives and do something else with them. And more of that fish series. So then I started making still life painting around maybe 2016 or 17, and that was just a bit after my mom passed away, and I really didn't have the joyful, ridiculous, creative capacity to paint more fish in the water. They're silly, they're sort of irreverent, and I don't know, it takes a lot of energy to do that. And so I felt like between that, and then my father had a brain tumor and was in the hospital for 1.5 years. So trying to figure out the energy of how you're going to keep painting was really important to me. So still life became important because it was there in my studio. And I started painting what was around me because I thought, if I stop painting, that's it. Like, I can't stop. How do I continue to move forward? And I didn't have ideas about what they were about. I didn't have a concept of, you know, a larger concept of what I was doing yet. I just kept moving. And so that allowed me to include art history, my own drawings, these alive sunflowers, essentially dead sunflowers of Van Gogh's paintings on a souvenir mug, a little Matisse fish, tools, things that started to stand in for people. So it became this space of freedom that I wasn't expecting, that I could only really see in retrospect. Here are a few of them in space. So they're pretty like larger medium-sized paintings. This is at a show at One River School in New York that started in February of 2020. At the beginning of 2020, I thought, this is my year, it's going to be great. I had a show, and then it closed, and it was still great because I got to go to my studio, but a lot of things were not great. But yeah, we roll with it. Here's another one from that series, and this I Love My Mom mug was something that I found in the basement of my parents' house when I was cleaning it out, and I was struck by it. Like, I felt like I was supposed to have this emotional charge, and then I was like, I've never seen this before. Did I give it to my mom? Did somebody buy it for me to give to my mom? Did my parents buy it for their mom? The generic quality of it and the anonymous quality of it was interesting to me because, you know, we charge things with sentimental value. We use objects to project things onto, and I thought it was really exciting for that reason. And that also meant I couldn't throw it out because I was like, whose mug is this? And so this is, I think, became a painting of souvenirs essentially. So I have this night lamp that the interior layer of it rotates when the light is on, and I think it looks a bit like a Manet sea painting. The Febreze has an ocean scene on it as well. I've still got my underwater drawings there, and the Matisse fish again, of course. So I always like thinking about souvenirs as they're objects that mark something or someone that has passed or is in the past, and conjuring them through painting is exciting for me. And thinking about again how what I was doing in undergrad is really similar to what I keep doing, and noticing that only over as time has passed. So the painting on the left is a painting from memory of my mom and I in the kitchen, and I think this is for like a class with Donna Nelson, so that makes sense in terms of memory and things like that. And I didn't know that I was painting a lot of the same objects in there. So this still life, which is a little tiny drawing, happened to have all these things that then connected to this figurative painting, and seeing them together just surprised me. And then I worked at the Philadelphia Museum of Art for a while. I was in gallery maintenance dusting paintings, so I'd see all the work every week. And this painting on the left, Courbet's Head of a Woman, is a fairly small painting, and I passed it pretty often, and I think it just struck me in a weird way. There's an implied almost landscape in the background, so it's not quite interior or exterior. We don't see that information. This ridiculous floral arrangement is so high contrast and bold, but the woman's not even looking at it, and she's focused on what she's reading. So I think the reason that I was struck by it is that I was projecting memories onto it of thinking about my mom sitting in her hospital bed or in her bed at home, and staying up at night and texting and worrying or whatever. So I wanted to replicate that, or sort of work out that feeling by using the Courbet painting. So I started with the still life and imagined the unnatural glow of a phone. So I replaced her letter with a phone, and I found that when I got to the portrait, I couldn't paint it. So I kept wiping it out, trying it again, wiping it out, and at this point I couldn't even tell you what was wrong with those images, but this ended up being the only place that I could fathom leaving it. And then here is a painting of my Van Gogh mug with a dark phone. And I think, looking back at some of these paintings, including the next one, the reasons why I thought I was painting them and the reasons that I look back at them and think I was painting them are very different. So I liked the reflection, I liked thinking about dark and light, but at the same time I think these paintings are all sort of solitary or lonely in a way that is contemplating grief, or the fact that it's a thing we carry with us. We don't really lose it at any point. We accumulate all of our experiences, whether joyful or not, and they're all sort of making their way in at all times. This is a large painting of our garden hose. So I wanted to paint it because I thought that green was supposed to mimic the grass, and how ridiculous that is, but it also fits in really well. So it starts to blend in a camouflage-like way, but the blue stripe stands out. And then in retrospect, I think of how it's it's just left there. The grass is growing over it. I was somewhat conscious of this while I was painting it. It's disconnected, it's out of use. If we moved it, there'd be dead spots under it. So it's an oddly vibrant and joyful painting, but I think there's also a lot of complexity happening there psychologically that I can't always control. This is a painting of my weekly calendar. So how do you, maybe like the other table paintings, how do you include everything in one painting? Or how do you make people see things that don't typically exist all together at once? And I thought this particular week was a good one to explain some of those things. Not a good week, but it just lists like all of my jobs, getting my taxes done, thinking about the gallery that I work for and shows that I was curating, and then this long list of dad stuff that's at the right hand corner that, when people pass away, you don't think about how much paperwork, how much stuff you have to do before you're allowed to get to grief or before you're allowed to process things because you've got deadlines. It's absurd. And it's something that we don't talk about, right? Like I didn't expect this because nobody talked to me about it and nobody wants to talk about these subjects. And around this time, I think Louise Fishman visited Tyler, and what she said stuck with me, and that was paint the personal. The personal is political because it means you're not alone. So even the idea of just putting this sort of, thing you do every week out there for somebody else to notice what they notice or not can be really exciting, just to connect with someone else. This is a painting of a phone going off in the middle of the night, which, is never a good thing. It's not, you don't want that to happen. So that's something that happened to me a lot when my father was in the hospital, and I wanted to just capture that anxiety, that feeling, whether it's something you're not sure if that's going to happen or if it is happening. So I used color to accentuate that sort of tension and that agitation, and purposely left that phone blank because it's a curious unknown. So you have to answer it to find out what it's about. I've got a few more art history things to share here. Just other reasons for investing in still life. I think it is one of the lower valued genres of painting. So it's not historical narrative, it's not enormous landscape, so it's not a kind of painting that's meant for like 10 to 50 people to observe at one time. Still life is typically something made by one person where one or two people can look at it at a time based on its scale or size. And I think that it deserves more credit than that, of course, but also so many women have been relegated to this category over time because they didn't have access to education, to figure models, to libraries and collections and things like that. And so thinking about that idea of what freedom in painting is can be about just diving deeper, having that subject that you can then do anything with. And this painting by Clara Peters, who's also a 1600s Dutch painter, this arrangement doesn't have anything to do with use. It's just all about the painting itself. There's a virtuosity here that's really impressive, that describes cheese as dry and flaky, that describes butter as being about room temperature, and the cherries are juicy looking, and all of that. The stack of the objects is really exciting to me because it refers to the picture plane itself. So as much as any other painting, I think it's just such a great example of what painting can be and what somebody can do on that rectangle. Someone else that I get really excited about is Vanessa Bell. So the sister of Virginia Woolf, part of the Bloomsbury group in England. She was one of the first British artists to really dive into the post-impressionists like Matisse and get excited about color and gesture in a way that was much less uptight than the British counterparts of the time. So here we have a still life of pattern, of flowers, of her own textile designs behind that, and then also this interesting brevity of use. So the mail is there for the day. You know, this is probably a one-day painting, so that mail probably got picked up later. So I like thinking about the context of this narrative, or somebody setting up their canvas in their home and describing those things. The other exciting thing that Vanessa Bell did was paint most of the interior of the Charleston Trust House, which was Duncan Grant's house, her partner. So she covered the house with murals, and the paintings on the wall are hers, his, and probably some of their friends as well. And I think of this in terms of world building. So I think of my still life paintings like that, or making my studio space something like that, where you create this entire environment that maybe describes the world that you want to exist. So a very hopeful idea of creating this bubble in the world where you have that freedom, and so on. Another Philadelphia Museum painting. I didn't mean to put them all in here, but this is Henry Matisse's Yellow Odalisque, and I've always loved Matisse, the color patterns, framing, everything. And when I think it was my first painting class at Tyler, Stanley Whitney just said, everybody go to the museum and come back and talk about one painting. And I saw this one. It's not too big, but it's really punchy, and I was so mad because it was hanging in between the two bathrooms in the room just after the Impressionist long wing toward the elevator. And I thought, why would you put such a great painting there? It's essentially a hallway to the bathroom. And I came back to school and I told Stanley this, and he was like, well, they don't know what to do with it. It's just too much color. They have no idea what to do with it. And that idea of thinking about color as one, physical, needing space and, doing something in a room that affects people physically, and also politically, like, is this too much color for the rest of the Impressionist wing? There's a lot of great paintings, but they're much more subdued in their vibrancy and so on. So this is a radical painting that didn't quite play nice with a lot of the others, so it got put in between the bathrooms. And this just sort of started off a lot of ideas for me about taste and artists and who gets to be in the museum and why, and all of that. This is a painting I also made around that time, probably in response to that issue. This is a vase that my dad always really loved. It is pearlescent. It is ugly. It has three-dimensional flowers on it, and he would always take it out and put it like in the middle of the room, and my mom would hide it. And they would do this. They'd go back and forth constantly, and the house that I grew up in was white walls, tan furniture, brown carpet, like everything was just sort of neutral in a way. And when I think about that, my parents came from a working class neighborhood and they moved up in life, and I think there's a lot at stake, and you don't want to stand out, you don't want to feel like you don't belong, and so taste becomes a way to signify that you belong, or like that you like the right things, that nothing stands out like in a way that's too weird. We didn't have flashing lights at Christmas, white lights only. And so I think to me it reads as a sort of insecurity that I don't know, maybe there's a lot more fun we can have if we build a different looking world, or the issues of thinking about clean, slick places that want us to be really efficient, and maybe there's other options. So I always think about how much color could I fit in a painting, how much like pattern decor. I'm stealing things from embroidery and other paintings, and just making this impossible setup that would never really stand up, but expands beyond the canvas edges. And that one really brings me to what I've been doing over the last year or two. Last summer I got to go to the Golden Foundation Artist in Residence program, where they give you an entire room of free paint. So everyone should go if they're a painter. And you can use it by the gallon, anything you want. So it was really freeing to have that lack of restriction of time, materials, and so on. So it really changed the way that I painted. I didn't bring my typical still life objects with me. I bought a couple like quilting fabrics and then just used what I had at the house, which included books, peonies from the garden, daisies from outside, the golden paint swatches, and so on. So it allowed me to take risks in a way that I hadn't before, maybe because of time. A lot of the earlier paintings would be more monochromatic, so I'd start with a very traditional layer of one color, wipe out of that, and then apply other colors on top. So they'd all be subdued in this maybe lens of green or lens of blue. And here I started essentially like color blocking or working more alla prima because I had all the things to do that, and I kind of didn't care if the paintings were good or bad. I just really wanted to use cadmium purple and like all the expensive colors. So I thought that was just a really exciting level of freedom that opened my work up in a lot of ways. So I just have a few from that summer. Still including some art history references. I think shadows are really prominent in a lot of my paintings, and playing with the shadow flower, the live flower, the printed flowers, kind of relates back to a lot of what I mentioned in still life earlier. This one sort of making it look optically confusing, even though it's just an observational still life on a ridiculous fabric. And at this point, my drawing practice has changed quite a bit. So instead of using colored pencil, I use watercolor much more often. I find it just as direct, but it allows me to move really fast and cover a lot of ground and think about color just as much as all of the mark making, and that's been a really helpful practice to make my paintings have a little bit more ease to them. I think maybe one of my teachers, Frank Bramlett, said, we all have to struggle, but you don't want it to look like it. So I do my best to move some of the struggle off of my canvas and work on the watercolor, because I can always wipe it off and it looks like I didn't have a hard time. This is a larger painting of dead dahlias with an Annie Albers book, patterned fabrics, my cutting mat, and a ruler. And the Annie Albers book is here because I think about her a lot. She was a Bauhaus educated artist who, like most women, were relegated to crafts at the time. The Bauhaus was an amazing institution for incorporating all arts, so everything is under one roof for the first time. And yet the men were the painters, the architects, and the sculptors, and the women were in fibers and the other crafts. So I think she always gets like not her due respect, even though I think a lot of people really love her. And I just wanted to include one of her books as a celebration of her design and just her presence and effect on so many artists. And this is my last slide here. This is also within the last year, so one of my newer paintings of the same group of dahlias, but alive, on top of books and fabric and color swatches and my wooden floor. And I think this is a good place to end it and open for questions. My photographer, John Carlano, when he was in my studio last time, said that my paintings had a stubborn sense of joy. And I thought that was a really good way to put it. And I think that's what I'm doing. Making space for that joy, pleasure, and everything else is a form of resistance. It's a really complex thing to do that and to try and make a new image. And I don't know, I think paintings should be just as complicated as people are, and to let that sort of breathe somewhere. So that is it. Do you guys have any questions? Go ahead. Sure. Are you a fan?
Well, there's one there.
Where? Oh, there's a ball.
There's a ball. It's all the way back at the beginning.
It is. How do I do that? Oh. Did you have a question about it? You just wanted to see it? Sorry. Put a lot of slides in here. One more. Yes. There he is. It's a great game. It has great music. I love it. Other thoughts, questions, requests?
Are these acrylic?
Most of them are, almost all of them in this slideshow are oil. I work with, if I work with acrylic, it looks more like watercolor staining on canvas. I don't think I included any of those. Go ahead.
Yeah, I was interested in what you were saying when you were having, family struggles and stuff, how it looked like you kind of moved away from kind of pure invention, and you said you kind of retreated maybe into this kind of direct things that you found on your house. That kind of resonates with me. It seems like that, sort of looking and sort of focusing outward at the world. It's a little more meditative, maybe. I mean, what was that sort of emotional dynamic of did you just feel like you didn't have the sort of creative enthusiasm to build something like purely out of your head? I mean, or
Yeah, I mean, I think that takes a lot of energy
right.
How do you make something,
Yeah.
if you can't see it in your mind, you can't paint it, right? You have to build up to that kind of invention, and that is a whole process. Not that painting from life isn't a whole process,
Right.
but I think the directness makes it much easier to just start painting that day.
Sure.
And I think there's a ton of invention that happens in observation too, and the more that I paint from observation, the more that I see that invention, or the more it's like, well, that doesn't have to be red, it can be
Right.
blue. I mean, even just in the simplest sense, you have control over all of that, even though it's in front of you too.
Yeah, I completely agree with you about how creative observational painting can be or is. I guess I feel that's sort of when you have a kind of absence of joy in life, the kind of whole creation from the whole, from the ground up feels so hard.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it seems to require a kind of optimism. Maybe it seems too simple, but something that I was just wondering if that was kind of what you were experiencing, because that makes sense to me.
Yeah, I mean, also the idea of just stopping painting or not feeling like I had time to develop, that was really scary, right?
Yeah.
So if you feel like you stop doing something, how do you start again?
Yeah.
So it was just a game to keep moving in some way.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
So in like the newer paintings, you have a lot of like plane changes. It looks like you're messing with like perspective of objects a lot.
Mhm.
Bring up the planes. Is there like any direct like inspiration for that, or was that just like messing with observation?
Yes, I mean, I just love all of the art history. So like, I'm always looking at painting. I'm always thinking about how illusions of space work and defy themselves. It's a really nice metaphor for the surface of the painting, because it's all on one surface. So if you get to have illusion and you get to have stuff that is really up close, that's exciting. And so I look at a lot of painters that include pattern, like the Cubists and the Proto-Cubists, as well as, Matisse does it too, where the floor and the wall are all red. So I think they're sort of smattered across a lot of art history. Mm-hmm.
For some of the textures in your painting, do you just like paint those, or like do you see them from observation? Like some of the textures, they look like they're boring.
I think that's just a system of the way the brush is working. So it's an interpretation. It's not always, the wood is not always pink and orange. So that, there's a freedom in that, but then the freedom in interpretation of how do you make marks that feel like that, or maybe marks that feel like a solid surface. And I love embroidery and textiles, so trying to find ways to fit in pattern is exciting. Nice. Any other questions? Go ahead.
Also, I'm not sure if you mentioned, like, what's your relationship with like flowers in your painting?
With flowers? I like gardening too. I mean, it's like still life, it's something that happens across time. So, you know, there are very old paintings that have flowers in them. There are very new paintings that have flowers in them. They're crazy shapes. They dig into the subject of color that I'm excited about. And the whole time you try to paint them, they're moving, which is infuriating and fun. So, you know, there's a lot that happens within that. You think it's a static object, and it's not. So I think it connects to a lot of the formal issues that I like in painting, and maybe giving myself certain kinds of problems.
I like flowers too. So,
Nice. They're fun. All right. Go ahead.
I mean, I just wanted to comment, and then not so much a question, but it seems so, as I look at the paintings, especially the more complex ones, it's just so interesting the way that objects and plots kind of reveal themselves, and just that the forms don't kind of map perfectly onto the pattern in a way that's like really predictable. So it's like things are I don't know, the paintings seem to reveal themselves like slowly. I find it really, really interesting, and just that they don't feel obvious, you know, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, it's, on one hand, I think the images that I use are quite direct, and then the way that I paint is not quite.
Right,
So
right.
I like having both.
Yeah. That's really nice.
I have like more of an observation. It's really interesting to see a lot of your early work, and you talk about painting with water, using water, but as you look at your like later work, I feel like you're doing that with light, and like the light becomes liquid, you can play with it, and you can create new things with color, and like, so I see like this translation of water kind of throughout your later work, even in the vases with the abstraction of the stems.
Oh, nice.
I
Yes.
think it looks awesome.
The vases are really fun. Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, on one hand, all painting is abstract, and then it's not. So I get to have it all in that sense where I get to make these really broken up marks that then make an image sometimes, or sometimes it falls away, I hope. Nice. And they're also probably all paintings about paintings, so it's okay.
It's fun to see them in this like format where it's like just a thin layer of light, and you're removed from the tactility of the paint because the paint is so tactile. And I feel like there's things that are coming to like the foreground that you almost don't see when you're standing in front of the painting. That was really interesting and fun to think about. A lot of the connections, I think, particularly like the conceptual connections and the details of the individual objects, I think are more visible on this like little thin layer of light, which is really fun. Now we gotta go back and see the real.
Yeah, I mean, that's what photos do, right? And that's why it's exciting to see paintings in person. But I mean, when I work, I take photos of paintings in progress to see what they're, I don't know, to attempt to have an objective view. But then at the same time, it's more fun when it doesn't quite read as fast.
Mm-hmm.
Are you working on multiple paintings at a time? Are you like, when you're doing that, do the other paintings kind of dictate what you're gonna go over and do in another one?
Kind of. I think I really like one-shot paintings. I like to start it and end it, not like in one day necessarily, but I like to be able to focus on the one still life or whatever. And so sometimes the painting will get to like a 3/4 of the way finished kind of space, and that hangs around, and that gets touched when I work on something else in the beginning stages. So it's not like I set up a bunch and then go for it. It's a little bit more one at a time. Nice. All right. Is that it for questions? All right. Thank you guys so much.